Here's a trip I almost didn't take because it felt like too much effort for just 2 days. It was February in Michigan. Cold, gray, not exactly the time of year that makes you want to get outside and explore. But it was the only weekend I had available to check out the Grand Rapids WOW Festival. WOW stands for the World of Winter Festival. So I kept going back and forth. Should I go or should I just stay home where it's nice and toasty? You know that feeling, right? You finally have a free weekend, but instead of getting excited, you start doing the math, the drive, the planning, the packing, the cost, in this case, the cold weather, and suddenly it just feels a whole lot easier to just stay home. But I went anyway, and it ended up being one of my favorite winter trips. We had a hotel right downtown, so we could just walk everywhere and just pop back to our room if we needed to warm up. And the theme that weekend at the WOW Festival, it made the whole experience really unique. And that's when I realized something. Most people are sitting on really good adventures that they don't even realize they have access to. Not because the destinations aren't there, but because how they're thinking of planning. So if you've ever looked at a free weekend and thought, it's not really worth going anywhere for 2 days, that's exactly the kind of thinking we're going to break down today. Because meaningful travel doesn't require a full week off. It doesn't require a huge budget. And it definitely doesn't require perfect conditions. Sometimes the best adventures are the ones hiding less than 2 hours from home. This YouTube channel is about getting the most out of every trip, whether it's a full vacation or a 48-hour getaway. And the place to start, it isn't the destination. It's with the rule. Try the 2 to 3 hour radius rule. Most people start weekend trip planning by asking this question: where should we go? And that question alone makes planning feel overwhelming because now your options are everywhere. That's too much. So instead, I use what I call the 2 to 3 hour radius rule. You set the boundary first, then you choose within it. That one simple rule turns endless options into a manageable handful of real possibilities. I've taken some really great trips within a couple hours from home. Places I've driven by hundreds of times and never stopped. This isn't about settling for less. It's about not spending half your weekend in the car. You're going to need to pick one anchor experience. The most common weekend trip mistake isn't picking a bad destination. It's trying to do too much once you get there. Trying to fit 6 things into a place that really deserves your attention for 2. That's where an anchor experience changes everything. An anchor is the one thing the whole trip builds around. A hike, a scenic drive, a historical site, a day at the beach, something genuinely worth making the drive for. Everything else just orbits that. Meals, stops, timing. It all gets easier when the trip has a center. I planned a trip with 4 main things I didn't want to miss. We rushed through them all. And honestly, I mostly remember just rushing to get to one place to the other, so we didn't miss our tour time. On the next trip, I just planned one waterfall hike. That was it. And somehow, I remember that whole trip way more clearly. If you want a simple, step-by-step way to put this all together before your next trip, I created something called 5 Days to Your Perfect Outdoor Adventure. It walks you through 5 simple steps to plan your next trip without the overwhelm. Because good trips, they don't happen by accident. They happen because the planning got simpler. I'll link that below in the description. Next, consider the loose plan method. Here's a version of trip planning that turns a 2-way getaway into a full-time job, and it almost always turns into a trip that feels more stressful than staying at home. Book the essentials, where you're sleeping, and 1 reservation if your anchor needs it. That's exactly what made the Grand Rapids trip work. We booked the hotel in the right location, and everything else fell into place. And then leave the rest of your trip open, not chaotic, just open. There's a difference. If your weekend trip has a color-coded spreadsheet, a shared Google Doc with tabs, and 3 backup restaurants per meal, it's already way too complicated. Discovery is part of the experience. The roadside diner you almost skipped, that overlook that wasn't on your list. That's the good stuff. Next, you need to pack smart for flexibility. The reason why most people feel underprepared for a weekend trip isn't that they packed too little. It's that they packed for the trip they planned, instead of the trip that might actually happen. A small day pack with the basics: water, snacks, a layer, portable charger, and a simple backup plan. That gives you flexibility because weather changes, roads close, parking lots fill up, and the trips that survive those moments, they're the ones that you've had room to make the pivot. If this is the kind of content that you want more of, practical road trip strategy that actually makes planning easier, hit subscribe. New videos launch every week. Next, you need to think in moments instead of miles. The trips most people remember aren't the ones where they covered the most ground. They're the ones where something happened that felt worth keeping. That sunrise you pulled over for, a tiny diner that wasn't listed in any guides, a back road that turned into the best part of the trip. Miles driven is not the metric. Distance from home, that's not a metric either. That feeling at the end, I needed that. That's the metric. That's what makes a 2-day trip feel like a real adventure. Now here's my go-to weekend trip formula. This gets even easier when you give it a repeatable shape. Here's the formula that I keep coming back to. Day 1, drive out and have one highlight on the way there or once you get there. Nothing huge, just enough to make the trip feel like it started. Day 2. Your anchor experience gets the best part of the day. After all, this is what the whole trip is built around. Day 3. One easy stop on the way home. A scenic overlook. A coffee shop in a small town. A short trail hike. Something that makes the trip end like an experience, not just a commute. The shift here isn't really about planning better. It's about letting go of the idea that a trip has to be a huge production to make it worthwhile. A weekend. A radius. One thing worth driving for. That's enough. The people that travel well aren't the ones with the most time or the biggest budget. They're the ones that stopped waiting for the perfect conditions and just went. And now that you know how to build a weekend trip that feels like a getaway, you're going to want to know a clear way to choose where to go when every option sounds so good. Click the video on the screen and it'll show you exactly how to choose your next road trip destination. Until next time, happy travels!